From the Oklahoman newsroom, it is time for Thunder Thursday, brought to you by Charleston's in Bricktown. Be sure to check them out and be sure to check out the Thunder. Lots of interesting games coming up. We've seen some definite improvement in recent days, and Eric Horn joins us on the phone to drill down into the why of that. Eric, obviously some disappointing results there for about a week or 10 days, but now we see the Thunder turning a bit of a corner here. That Philly win obviously over the weekend was big, but then we see the blowout win in New York, but then a really quality win against a Portland team here in Oklahoma City that is basically neck and neck with the Thunder in the Western Conference standings. And commonality, playing better defense. What have you seen, Eric, in terms of the defense that may be leading to some of these better results for the Thunder?
Well, I think they're just concentrating more, first and foremost. You know, playing the Knicks helps, too. The Knicks are not very good. It's easier to get your defense together for 3 quarters against the Knicks than it is for 4 quarters against Philly and Portland. But, no, they're just concentrating more. You know, the three-point line has been a big emphasis for them. You know, Billy Donovan was talking about how they needed to defend the three-point line better after the loss to the Lakers. And they did against Philly, almost to their detriment, you know, fouling three-point shooters time and time again. I think they put either three-point shooters or guys shooting long twos on the line 5 times in that game because they were just so eager to close out and get out to those three-point shooters. But that's been the key for them, running guys off the three-point line. You know, besides that third quarter against Portland where C.J. McCollum just went crazy, they've been really good at defending the three in the last 3 games. And that's the start for them. When they're committed and when they're focused on getting out to guys at the three-point line, that makes everything better. Their rotations have been better on the backside in terms of the pick and roll. Their focus has been better on the ball with Russell Westbrook and Dennis Schroeder. So it's shown up in the last 3 games kind of closer to the defensive team that we know they're capable of being.
Well, Eric, we know that interior defense with Steven Adams and Jeremy Grant, pretty solid. Those guys are going to man it, and you know, some nights they're going to be downright spectacular. Some nights they're just going to be solidly, you know, good in there. But does it really come down? It sounds like a lot of what you're saying is it comes down to those guards, and we know Paul George, excellent defender. We know Russell Westbrook can be a little bit in and out. Terrence Ferguson evolving as a defender. Dennis Schroeder evolving as a defender. But it seems like it really comes down to those guards, how good this team is going to be defensively. And it looked to me, at least, you know, if you take a small sample size of that Portland game, you saw those guards being really good defensively.
Yeah. Russell Westbrook was fully engaged. Terrence Ferguson, as we talked about a few days ago, was running his tail off. C.J. McCollum's a tough assignment. He's a guy who runs off of multiple screens. He's got a lot of stamina. And Ferguson was with him. And Ferguson made him take tough shots. And, you know, a big thing about staying with your defender in the NBA is you just got to make guys take difficult shots at times. Sometimes they're just going to make them. Damian Lillard and C.J. McCollum are 2 of the best guards in the league. And for Terrence Ferguson to do the job he did, you know, as a 20-year-old who's still learning, still trying to get his foul situation figured out because he does still foul at a high rate, you know, that makes a big difference for a team that's going to sometimes get inconsistent defensive performances from Russell Westbrook and Dennis Schroeder, you know, either because Schroeder's a smaller guy who can't work over screens as well as Ferguson, or Russell Westbrook just likes to basically play free safety sometimes, and he likes to switch a lot, and the team likes to switch a lot. So sometimes you're going to get situations where Ferguson and Jeremy Grant and the guys around Russell Westbrook are doing a lot of work on the perimeter. So the Thunder's done a good job. The Portland game was definitely one of their better performances of the season in that regard, perimeter defense, because those 2 assignments are just so difficult to guard. And you saw it in Terrence Ferguson. He was outstanding.
Yeah, for sure. They play that motion ball movement is so key, and player movement so key for Portland. You don't see a lot of teams with that much effort to get open shots. But Thunder played well. Can they carry it over? A guy that seems to be carrying it over no matter who the opponent is Paul George. Defensively, offensively, the guy is just playing out of his mind, but has been for a really long period, which makes it even more amazing. Eric, you know, obviously the league is gaga over the beard. James Harden continues to be the guy everybody's talking about, but Paul George is making some noise too. But where do things stand in terms of MVP, Paul George's place and all that? Kind of update us, give us a big picture look at how that all looks right now.
It's going to be tough for Paul George unless the Thunder gets up to like the 2 or may even have to get up to the #1 seed in the league. Because the records of the team above them were really, you got Denver and Golden State that are playing really well. The Thunder hasn't went on a monster road streak, win streak since probably like November. So it's hard to like kind of get on the Thunder's train when it comes to like wins. And frankly, like they're just a team that just doesn't have the sparkling offensive numbers that really put them up in that upper echelon. But again, like you were talking about with James Harden, it's really hard to take your eyes off of what Harden's doing offensively, even though Paul George is having a better season all around. Harden's offensive efficiency without Chris Paul carrying the Rockets night after night when the Rockets defense clearly isn't what it used to be. Considering the Rockets' rocky start, Harden putting up these historic numbers from 3. Everybody's in love with the three-pointer right now. Harden is the analytics darling of the league. So it's really hard to take your eyes off of him. It's hard to take your eyes off of Giannis because Giannis gets so many dunks, and the Bucks are just playing unbelievable ball too in the East. But Paul George should be squarely in that conversation. He should be a top 5, 6 guy in the MVP race right now. It's really early still. And frankly, he should be the front runner for Defensive Player of the Year. The Thunder, for the most part, has had the #1 defense in the league all year. Just those past couple of weeks, they've had slippage that's bumped them down to 3. But Paul George has been at the head of that, leading the league in deflections, leading the league in loose balls recovered, second in the league in steals to Russell Westbrook. He dictates a lot of what the Thunder's defense does because he's so versatile. He's so good on the ball, off the ball. He's a good defensive rebounder. And that should put him squarely, in that 1 or 2 player conversation with him and Rudy Gobert, maybe a Draymond Green for Defensive Player of the Year. He's the best perimeter defender right now in the league. You can make an argument for Kawhi Leonard too, but I think Paul George is having a better overall all-around season. So he should definitely be that guy in that conversation for that award. Now MVP is going to be a little bit tougher.
Yeah, and a guy that would factor into both, presumably, Anthony Davis. We find out New Orleans in town on Thursday night, but we find out Anthony Davis going to be dealing with an injury, so likely to miss extended period of time from the Pelicans roster. I got to think that sort of narrows the field for something like Defensive Player of the Year. And the fact that Paul George plays that perimeter position, Eric, does that carry any weight with voters, do you think? The whole idea that with this league turning so dramatically towards the 3, all that comes with it, guarding that perimeter, how much more difficult that is. Does that carry any weight in your mind? Could it potentially with voters as it relates to Paul George and something like Defensive Player of the Year?
Yeah, I think so. And then I think also, you've got the narrative behind the Thunder too. They lost Andre Robertson last season. They haven't had him all season this year. And the drop-off when Andre Robertson wasn't on the floor last year was pretty telling. The Thunder's defense, kind of fell off a cliff after Andre Robertson got hurt. But for the Thunder to start the year the way that they have with Paul George without Andre Robertson kind of speaks to not only the adjustments that Billy Donovan and the staff have made to tighten up the defense, and then putting Jeremy Grant in the starting lineup helps, of course, because Carmelo Anthony was kind of a negative there in terms of the defense. But just the adjustments that Paul George has made and being as flexible as he is, we saw in the last game, Billy Donovan being able to change up the rotations. That's a Paul George thing. That's him going to Paul George and saying, "Look, we need you for these minutes as opposed to these minutes. Can you do this?" And Paul George, I think I wrote about this earlier in the year, he's just one of the more flexible stars you're going to see in the league in terms of when he can play, what positions he can play, who he can guard. There's really not a lot he can't do on the court, and I think that should play into his Defensive Player of the Year candidacy.
Yeah, and Paul George saying after that game against Portland, all that stuff, not really of his concern right now, lots of basketball left, and obviously he's right. Winning will be important to him, but so will just more games left out there before all of that's decided. Obviously, all-star selections will pop up before any of that end-of-season award talk comes to fruition. But even with this defensive improvement, Eric, and we know this team is really going to, their fate is going to, rise and fall on defense, and Paul George leading that charge on defense, but they're making a lot more shots of late, Eric. What do you, I mean, I think they're getting some better looks, but is it that? Is it guys just improving, guys getting comfortable? What do you sort of tab this all to, as we've seen the Thunder crawl out of the cellar, for example, on three-point percentage? What's going on here?
Yeah, these are shots that they weren't making earlier in the year, but they were creating. These guys just weren't making these shots earlier in the year. Terrence Ferguson was not, shooting 50% in a seven-game stretch. Patrick Patterson was flat. Even Paul George wasn't consistent, but they stuck with it. They continued to play, and they were creating these opportunities earlier in the season. So I think it's a credit to the Thunder, their coaching, and particularly Russell Westbrook, for kind of sticking to the game plan, sticking to what these guys worked through in the preseason and the offseason to try and continue to get the best shot, try and get shots within the first 7 seconds of the shot clock after a defensive rebound. That doesn't necessarily have to be a Russell Westbrook shot or a Paul George shot, but just the best available shot, whether it's Jeremy Grant shooting a three, whether it's Terrence Ferguson getting out in transition. They're playing at a faster pace. They're getting off more shots within the 48 minutes. They lead the league in shot attempts. And part of that is because, frankly, they're just not that good of a shooting team. They've got to shoot the ball earlier in the shot clock because that's when defenses are not set. They've got to take a lot of shots because they're a good offensive rebounding team, which gets them more opportunities. So kind of changing the way that they play the game, playing at a faster tempo, I think sticking with it has worked out for them in these last few weeks. Now, look, has it come, unfortunately, in the same stretch where they haven't played very good defense and resulted in some bad losses? Yeah, that stunk. Minnesota was a bad loss. Washington was a bad loss. Losing the way that they lost to the Lakers in Atlanta, those are bad losses to have against teams that are under the Thunder standard. But to lose a few games in that stretch and maybe see your offense take an uptick, I think that's a pretty solid sacrifice to make because the defense was going to come back. It was only a matter of time for their defense to get better. And now you've seen the offense kind of hit its stride. And, there's frankly more for them to chew off in terms of the offense because Russell Westbrook still hasn't gotten to a point to where he's gotten on a 2 or 3 week tear. So there's more for them to get from the offense. And then, Alex Reyes is a guy who still needs to come back and, frankly, hasn't shot the ball even when he's played. So there's still more for them to get to. And there's optimism there.
Eric, as I think about the Thunder making more shots, it's easy to point to Terrence Ferguson, a guy you mentioned off the top there, as maybe the most surprising. But is he the guy that you would say, it's really amazing how he's come along in terms of being able to shoot the ball? Or is there somebody else? I mean, Jeremy Grant's been better from three than we saw at the beginning of the year. I don't know. Who do you sort of point to and say, wow, even if you would have told me the Thunder was going to improve their shooting, I didn't necessarily think that guy would get that much better?
Yeah, I'd probably say it's Ferguson, particularly from where he started the season. The defense is always there. He's been good defensively from the first game, aside from the fouling, which he's going to get better with as he gets older and stronger, and referees start to get a better understanding of who he is and how talented he is. But I did not expect Terrence Ferguson to get his three-point percentages up to the high 30s. I thought he'd be a guy who would settle in the mid-30s, but he's been great. He hasn't hesitated with his shot. He's been even more decisive off the dribble. He's been a guy who's been able to finish in transition better. He just looks more comfortable offensively than he did earlier in the season. And, Billy Donovan gets some credit for that. He stuck with Terrence Ferguson. He didn't pull him from the starting lineup. A lot of people were calling for Hamidou Diallo. Mm-hmm. But Hamidou Diallo looks lost the last few weeks defensively. And Terrence Ferguson has not looked lost all season. He knows exactly what he needs to do. He's studied. He's done the homework. He's worked with Andre Robertson and Paul George on improving himself defensively, and it shows. And I think he's reaping the benefits of that work through his offense now because, he never had a broken shot necessarily. It just wasn't going in. So it's good for him that he's getting some offensive production because, that just makes the Thunder that much more dangerous.
Yeah, and if you want to read more about Terrence Ferguson's impact on this team, be sure to check out Maddie Lee's story about him and how important it is that he be performing at this level, considering he's still on that rookie contract on a team that has a lot of salary that they're paying out. Great stuff on News OK and in the Oklahoman on Thursday. Eric, before we get out of here on Thunder Thursday, let's look ahead a little bit because, Thunder schedule, they've got some interesting games coming up, but they've also got the way that these games are spaced. Here for a couple weeks, Thunder had been basically play, have an off day, play, have an off day. Lots of games in really rapid succession. Thursday night, New Orleans is in town, another, play, off, play. But then no game until Sunday when Milwaukee's in town. You previously talked about how well they've been playing. Then a game at Orlando Tuesday. Then again a couple days before a game at Miami on Friday. Then Sunday back here against Boston. It's definitely less games in the amount of time compared to what the Thunder had been going through. What kind of benefit could that have, regardless of who they're playing against in these next few games?
Yeah, they just frankly haven't had a lot of days to practice in the past, month and a half. All of December was just not a lot of practice time. The beginning of January, they haven't practiced a ton. So any time that they can just kind of decompress and get some practice days where they can go through some stuff and actually, walk through some, not even necessarily have physical practices, but walk through some stuff as a team for a full day without having to prepare for another team right then and there, that's beneficial, and they're going to have those opportunities. Now, it's also beneficial from an Alex Abrines standpoint because this is a guy who's, slowly starting to integrate himself back into the team. He's been active for 2 games in a row, even though the Thunder hasn't played him. That's important for him to have those days with the team to where they can get a little bit closer to knowing, if this guy is ready to come back. It's just good for teams in general to have those days where they're not traveling and they're also not preparing for another team right then and there. Frankly, it's just good for their bodies and their mental health. Just to be able to not be on a plane or not having to be able to having to run around all over the place. I don't know what they're doing in their spare time in Oklahoma City. Russell Westbrook might be going to get formula for all I know. But it's good for them. They haven't had a lot of that this year or in the past month and a half or so. And certainly the coaching staff's going to take advantage of it.
Yeah, and as you look at these games, Eric, too, give us a little insight. We see games like Orlando and Miami, not teams anywhere near the top of the Eastern Conference. You expect some positive results there, but obviously sort of the bookend games, if you will, are the Sunday games, Milwaukee and Boston. Some challenges there. What do you want to see out of the Thunder as it relates to this next 5 or 6 games on their schedule?
Well, you want the defense to continue to play the way it has. New Orleans, even though they don't have Anthony Davis, New Orleans has actually been putting up some pretty impressive offensive numbers even without in the games that they don't have him. Julius Randle is always a problem for the Thunder, regardless of whether or not Anthony Davis is on the floor. The Thunder got crushed on the boards against Portland a couple nights ago, 20 offensive rebounds. That's not good enough, and that's a recipe for disaster against a guy like Julius Randle, who's a big body on the inside. In terms of Milwaukee, Milwaukee's a team that shoots a ton of three-pointers. They're taking almost half of their shots are coming from 3, and they space the floor out 1 through 5. Giannis is really the one in, but a guy like Brook Lopez, Steven Adams is going to have to be aware that Brook Lopez is going to pull up from 28, 29 feet, and they're really going to test. Again, they're going to test the Thunder's rebounding in that regard, too, because Steven Adams is going to be pulled out to the perimeter. So guys have to be active. They got to be ready to pounce on loose balls, long rebounds. because Milwaukee takes a ton of three-pointers. That's how they create space for Giannis to drive and get those dunks. It's going to be a tall task for Jeremy Grant, Paul George to stick with Giannis and also be aware enough to spring for rebounds. And then teams like Orlando and Miami, the Thunder's had success against Eastern Conference teams this year up until they ran into Washington, and then they had that bad loss in Atlanta. So the Thunder really doesn't have excuses against Orlando and Miami. They're going to have plenty of time to get ready for Miami, which is dangerous going out to Miami, having all that downtime. But Orlando and Miami are beatable teams, winnable games, and then you want to have those wins in your pocket going into a tough game in Boston on a Sunday, which is a tough place to play, tough team to beat, and a team that's playing, pretty good ball in the Eastern Conference, and you just had trouble beating it in the last few years. So it's going to be an interesting test week for the Thunder coming up, and I want to see how their rebounding and their defense responds, because those are the two things that they lean on, not their offense.
All right, lots of interesting stuff left for the Thunder as we rapidly approach the All-Star break, but some telling games left in the next week or 10 days. We'll have all your coverage in the Oklahoman and on News OK, so be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.